Tonight, I have a terrifying story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Have you ever started a new job feeling excited and ready to begin, only to realize things weren't quite what they seemed? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jordan, a technician who joined a pharmaceutical factory in Philadelphia. What started as the perfect job opportunity quickly turned into a terrifying nightmare that he could never forget. This story is packed with creepy encounters, eerie twists, and supernatural elements that'll make you question what's real and what's not. So get cozy, dim the lights, and jump into the story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. Our story begins with Jordan, a 30-year-old technician who joined a pharmaceutical factory in Philadelphia. What seemed like a great opportunity soon turned into an experience he would never forget. Jordan had spent years working on jobs repairing machinery and managing industrial equipment when he moved back to Philadelphia to be closer to his family. He was eager to find something stable. After months of searching, he came across a job listing for a factory maintenance technician at a pharmaceutical company that, for the sake of the story, I will refer to as PharmaCorp. The position was a perfect fit for his skills, fixing complex machines, maintaining production lines, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Jordan applied immediately, submitting his resume and certifications. To his surprise, he received an invitation for an interview just days later. It felt like a sign, and Jordan couldn't wait to see what the job had in store for him. The interview took place in a modern, dark gray building on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, surrounded by tall trees and silence. The factory seemed like a world of its own. Jordan arrived early, dressed in a crisp collared shirt and black dress pants, ready to impress. The receptionist directed him to a waiting area where several other candidates sat nervously flipping through their resumes. Jordan felt confident. His experience made him an ideal candidate. But as the minutes ticked by, he noticed something strange. Unlike other interviews he'd attended, none of the candidates were being called in. Instead, they seemed to leave the building one by one without explanation. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Jordan was called into a small meeting room. His interviewer, Mr. Zhang, greeted him with a firm handshake. Zhang was an older man with a sharp gaze and a calm demeanor that immediately put Jordan at ease. The interview began with the usual questions about his work history, technical skills, and experience with factory equipment. Jordan answered confidently, detailing the projects he had worked on and the types of machinery he had handled, but halfway through the questions took an unexpected turn. "Mr. Hai," Zhang began, his tone suddenly serious. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" Jordan stared for a minute, unsure if he'd heard correctly. I guess so. I mean, I've heard stories, but I've never experienced anything myself." Mr. Zhang nodded thoughtfully. "And your family? Do they have any spiritual connections? Anyone with sensitivities?" Jordan hesitated. "Not that I know of." The older man leaned forward slightly. "This factory has a history. You'll hear stories of strange noises and unexplained incidents. Some workers say it's just the machinery, others aren't so sure." Jordan forced a nervous laugh, unsure how to respond well. "I'm here to fix machines, not ghosts." Zhang smiled faintly but didn't comment further. Instead, he handed Jordan a clipboard with a short technical test. The questions were straightforward, and Jordan completed it in minutes. "Well done," Zhang said, scanning the answers. "You're hired. You'll start next Monday." Jordan's heart skipped a beat. "Really? Just like that?" Mr. Zhang nodded. "You're exactly what we need. Welcome to the pharmaceutical life." As Jordan left the building, a strange feeling settled over him. He couldn't shake the odd question Zhang had asked. Why would a pharmaceutical factory care about the supernatural? Was it just an attempt to gauge his nerves, or was there something more to it? When he got home, Jordan told his wife about the interview. "They asked me about ghosts," he said, still trying to make sense of it. "Maybe they were just testing you," she replied, laughing it off. "Or maybe they've got haunted machines." Jordan laughed, brushing off the thought, but deep down he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Little did he know, his first few weeks on the job would prove that his instincts were correct. Jordan's first day at PharmaCorp started like any other new job. The factory was enormous, its white walls and spotless floors a stark contrast to the dim, mysterious vibe he had felt during the interview. He was introduced to the team, a mix of seasoned technicians and some fresh hires, and he quickly immersed himself in his duties as a maintenance technician. His main task was to keep the machines in the production lines running smoothly. The factory specialized in manufacturing capsules and syrups, with massive conveyor belts and towering pill pressing machines dominating the space. Jordan was in his element, inspecting wiring, lubricating gears, and running diagnostic tests. The hum of machinery filled the air, a comforting sound to someone who thrives on solving mechanical puzzles. The first 3 months were uneventful. Jordan worked diligently, often finishing his tasks early, earning his peers' respect. He even grew close to 2 colleagues: Renee, a cheerful woman in charge of quality control, and Bob, a senior technician whom took Jordan under his wing. But once Jordan became a permanent employee, everything changed. On his first day in his new role, Jordan was assigned to inspect a malfunctioning capsule coating machine. During the night shift, the factory, usually bustling with activity, felt eerily quiet after hours. Only a skeleton crew was present: Renee, Bob, and a couple of other workers. As Jordan worked on the machine, he noticed a few things. The air felt heavier, and the shadows in the corners of the factory were darker than they should have been. At first, he chalked it up to his imagination, but then came the sound. A faint tapping like fingernails on glass echoed through the space. Jordan froze, his wrench poised midair. "Did you hear that?" he asked Renee, who was inspecting a batch of pills nearby. "Hear what?" she replied, not looking up. "Tap, tap, tap." This time it was louder, coming from the large glass window that overlooked the factory floor. Jordan turned toward the noise, his heart pounding. The window was dark, reflecting only the dimly lit interior of the factory. But just as he was about to dismiss it as a trick of the light, he saw it, a faint silhouette standing perfectly still on the other side of the glass. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. The figure on the other side of the window was tall, its outline barely visible. It didn't move, didn't sway, it just stood there watching Renee. Jordan whispered, his voice trembling, "There's someone out there." Renee finally looked up, following his gaze to the window. "Jordan, there's no way anyone could be out there. That leads to the storage wing, and it's locked at night." Before Jordan could respond, the tapping began again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like it was meant to draw their attention. The silhouette didn't budge. "Let's just get this done and leave." Renee muttered, trying to mask her fear. Jordan nodded, forcing himself to focus on the machine, but his hands shook as he tightened bolts and adjusted the conveyor belt. The tapping eventually stopped, but the oppressive feeling in the air lingered. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences continued. The factory speakers, which usually played soft instrumental music to keep workers calm, suddenly crackled to life. A haunting melody began to play. Traditional Chinese music, the kind you might hear during a funeral procession. Renee's head shot up. "Why is that playing?" she whispered. Jordan shook his head. "I don't know. The speakers are supposed to be offline during night shifts." Then came the laughter. It started as a low chuckle, barely audible over the music, but quickly grew louder and more distinct. It was the laughter of a woman, high-pitched, mocking, and echoing through the empty factory. Bob appeared from the other end of the room, his face pale. "Did you guys touch the audio system?" he asked. His voice was shaky. "No," Jordan replied. "What's going on?" Before Bob could answer, the lights flickered, plunging the factory into momentary darkness. When they came back on, the music and laughter had stopped, but in the eerie silence that followed, Jordan, again, heard the tapping. This time it wasn't on the glass, it was on the metal walls of the production room. "What the hell is that?" Bob muttered, stepping closer to the source of the noise. Jordan grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached the wall. His heart raced as he shone the beam across the surface, searching for the source of the sound. Just as he reached the corner, the tapping stopped. Then all of a sudden, from the far end of the room, a loud crash echoed through the factory. Renee screamed as a stack of boxes toppled over, spilling capsules across the floor. The 3 of them rushed over, but no one was there. The room was empty. "That's it," Renee said, her voice trembling. I'm calling it a night. Whatever's happening here, I don't want any part of it." Bob nodded in agreement. "Let's shut everything down and go home. We can deal with this tomorrow." Jordan didn't argue. He quickly packed up his tools, his mind racing with questions. As they left the factory, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Before leaving, Jordan turned to Bob. "Does this kind of thing happen often?" Bob hesitated. His usually confident demeanor was replaced by unease. "Sometimes. People say this place is different. I didn't believe it at first, but after tonight," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Just be careful, Jordan. Don't stay late unless you absolutely have to." Jordan nodded, though his gut told him this was only the beginning. The shadows in the factory seemed deeper, darker, and more alive than ever. He couldn't help but wonder if it was just the stress of the job, or was there truly something lurking in the factory. The next night, Jordan was assigned another late shift, this time to inspect a conveyor belt system in the factory's sterile room. He hesitated at first, the events of the previous night still fresh in his mind, but he knew he couldn't refuse. It was his job after all. When he arrived at the factory, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The air was dense, almost suffocating, and the faint hum of the machinery seemed louder than it should have been. Renee and Bob were also on the night shift again, and though none of them spoke about the previous night, their nervous glances spoke volumes. By midnight, the factory had fallen into its eerie rhythm of silence, broken only by the mechanical sounds of the machines. Jordan worked alone in the sterile room, his tools laid out neatly on a metal table. He had just finished tightening a bolt on the conveyor belt when he felt it, a distinct chill that crept down his spine. The room wasn't cold. The sterile environment was kept at a steady temperature, but this chill was different. It wasn't just physical, it felt wrong, invasive, as though something unseen had entered the room. "Get a grip, Jordan," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He turned back to the conveyor belt, but then he heard it, a faint shuffling sound, like feet dragging across the tiled floor. It was coming from behind him. Jordan froze, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned around, expecting to see Renee or Bob, but the room was empty. The only thing in front of him was the large glass window that overlooked the factory floor. Then he saw it. A shadowy figure stood just outside the window. Its form was indistinct, a humanoid shape with no discernible features. It didn't move or make a sound, but its presence was palpable. Jordan's heart pounded as he stared at the figure, his mind racing. Was it a reflection? A trick of the light? He stepped closer to the window, hoping for a logical explanation. As he approached, the shadow moved. It wasn't a reflection. The figure shifted slightly, its head tilted as if observing him. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Jordan stumbled backward, his pulse racing. He glanced around the room, but there was no sign of the figure. The factory floor beyond the window was empty. A loud bang echoed through the room, jolting Jordan out of his daze. It came from the far corner, where a stack of metal trays had toppled over. He rushed to the corner, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Just as he reached the trays, the lights in the room flickered and went out. Plunged into darkness, Jordan fumbled for his flashlight, his hands shaking. The sterile room was now eerily quiet, the hum of the conveyor belt silenced. Jordan's flashlight flickered to life, casting a narrow beam of light across the room. The trays were still scattered on the floor, but nothing else seemed out of place. "Renee?" Bob called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. No response. He turned toward the door, intending to leave the room to find the others, but as he stepped into the hallway, he stopped dead in his tracks. Stood at the end of the corridor was a woman in a long white dress. Her face was obscured by her dark, disheveled hair, and she stood unnaturally still as though she were waiting for him. Jordan's grip on the flashlight tightened. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet felt cemented to the floor. The woman's head tilted slightly, and though he couldn't see her face, he felt her gaze pierce through him. When she moved, she didn't walk, she floated, her feet hovering inches above the ground as she glided toward him. Jordan's breath hitched as he stumbled backward, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Who are you? What do you want?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stopped abruptly, her head snapping up to reveal her face. Jordan felt his stomach drop. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones. A chilling smile spread across her face, her lips curling upward in a way that seemed almost inhuman. Before Jordan could react, the lights flickered back on, and the woman was gone. The hallway was empty, as though she had never been there. Jordan leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, as he tried to catch his breath. He didn't bother finishing his inspection. He rushed back to the main production area, where he found Renee and Bob. They were standing near the entrance, their faces pale. "Did you see her?" Jordan blurted out, his voice trembling. Renee and Bob exchanged uneasy glances. "See who?" Renee asked. "The woman in white," Jordan said. "She was in the hallway just standing there. Then she disappeared." Bob placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You're not the first to see her," he said quietly. "She's been here for years. People say she was a worker who died in an accident decades ago. Some nights she shows herself. You just have to ignore her." "Ignore her?" Jordan repeated, his voice rising. "How am I supposed to ignore something like that?" "You don't have a choice. If you acknowledge her, she'll follow you." Jordan felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced back toward the hallway, half expecting to see the woman again, but it was empty for now. Jordan didn't return to the factory for 2 days after the terrifying encounter with a woman in white. He had called in sick, citing exhaustion, but the truth was he needed time to process what had happened. Was he losing his mind, or was there truly something supernatural lurking in the factory? On the third night, his manager, Mr. Zhang, called Jordan. "We need you back. The sterilizer unit is acting up, and you're the only one who knows how to fix it." Jordan hesitated, but eventually agreed. He couldn't afford to lose the job, no matter how terrified he felt that evening. As he stepped back into the factory, the atmosphere seemed heavier, the air thick with tension. It felt as though the building itself was alive, its walls pulsing with an energy he couldn't explain. Renee and Bob were waiting for him near the sterilizer unit. "You sure you're okay to be here?" Bob asked, concern etched on his face. "I'll be fine," Jordan lied, trying to mask his fear as they worked to diagnose the problem. The factory was unusually quiet. The machines were off, and the usual hum of activity was absent. Jordan tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting to the hallway where he had seen the woman in white. Then it started again. A faint tapping echoed through the room. It wasn't coming from the glass this time. It was closer, almost as though it was on the metal panels of the machinery. Tap, tap, tap. Renee froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Jordan nodded, his heart pounding. "It's coming from inside the unit." The three of them stared at the sterilizer, its metal frame reflecting the dim light. Bob took a step forward, wrench in hand, and cautiously opened the panel. Inside, everything seemed normal at first glance. Wires, gears, and tubing. But then they saw it, a long, pale hand pressed against the interior wall, its fingers impossibly thin and skeletal. Before anyone could react, the hand vanished, dissolving into the shadows. "Close it," Renee screamed, backing away. Bob slammed the panel shut, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" Jordan couldn't speak. His mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but there was none. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the entire room. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. In the pitch-black room, Jordan fumbled for his flashlight, his hands trembling. When the beam finally illuminated the space, he wished it hadn't. Standing in the middle of the room was the shadowy figure he had seen days before, but this time it was closer, its form more defined. It was tall, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light. Renee let out a strangled cry, gripping Bob's arm. "We need to leave now." But the figure didn't move. It just stood there staring, its presence suffocating. Then slowly it began to lift its arm, pointing toward Jordan. He felt his legs buckle, his chest tightening as though an invisible weight was pressing down on him. "Jordan, move!" Bob shouted, grabbing his shoulder and dragging him toward the exit. The three of them ran, the flashlight's beam bouncing wildly as Jordan struggled to keep up behind them. The guttural hum grew louder, reverberating through the factory like a warning. As they reached the hallway, the woman in white appeared again, blocking their path. Her face was no longer obscured by her hair. Her hollow eyes stared directly at Jordan, her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. Jordan felt frozen in place, unable to move or speak. Renee and Bob pulled him forward, breaking the spell as they pushed past the woman. She didn't follow, but her laughter filled the hallway. Chilling and inhuman, the trio burst into the night air, gasping for breath. The factory loomed behind them, its windows dark and foreboding. They didn't stop running until they reached the parking lot where they collapsed onto the ground. "What the hell is going on in there?" Renee panted, her hands shaking. Bob shook his head. "I don't know, and I don't care. I'm not going back." Jordan remained silent, staring at the factory. He could still feel the weight of the shadow's gaze, its hollow eyes burned into his memory. "We need to tell someone," he finally said. "Jang, the management, someone has to know what's happening in there." Bob laughed bitterly. "You think they don't know? Why do you think the turnover here is so high? People see things, they leave, and no one talks about it." Jordan's stomach churned. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The questions during his interview, the warnings, the stories, it all made sense now. This factory wasn't just haunted, it was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was dangerously thin, and guys, that's where Jordan's story ends, or at least that's all he's willing to share. What happened after that night remains a mystery. But one thing is clear, the factory wasn't just a workplace, it was something far darker. A place where spirits lingered and shadows came to life. So do you think, was it all in Jordan's head? Or is there truly something sinister about the factory? Let me know in the comments. And remember, the next time you're working late and you hear something strange, don't ignore it. Trust your instincts. Thank you for watching The Dark Side of My Room. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. And until next time, stay safe and stay spooky.